Okay, Gabe, welcome to the Freelancers Mic. I've got to ask you this right away because it stopped me when I read it. Before the Kids podcast, you and your client worked together every single day for 2 weeks. That is not normal. What were you so afraid would happen if you didn't?
Hi, Lydia. Glad to be here with you today. And that's a great question. And the client wasn't just any client, it was my brother and my business partner, Paul. And he had this great opportunity to be on the Kits' podcast. And he wanted to make the most of it. He wanted to maximize the impact of what he was saying. And so I think what he was afraid of is getting onto the podcast and then not having shared the ideas that would really make a difference. And so that's why we worked so hard for 2 weeks to make sure when he had that opportunity that he made the absolute most of it.
Wow, that's so amazing. And for context, because I should tell my listeners who you are. So, Gabe, welcome to the show. And if you're listening to the podcast for the first time, this is Gabe. He has helped over 500 financial advisors. He has helped them prepare for podcast appearances. He wrote the book Sharpen Your Message. So today we are going to talk about why being yourself is terrible advice, or how to stop sounding like a robot on a podcast, and what you should do instead. So, but first, I want to stay on that 2 weeks preparation. So, Gabe, walk me through the 2 weeks of preparation before that interview, and what did you actually prepare every single day?
Yes. Well, so the podcast was 2 weeks out. And so Paul, my brother, he called me and he said, I want you to help me sharpen my message because normally I'm working with financial professionals. But in this case, this was his opportunity. He had this great chance to be in front of his ideal prospective clients and to share his message from his books in a meaningful way. And so I said, we're going to meet every single day for 2 weeks. We met an hour or two, and even on Saturdays, even on Sundays, we kept that preparation going. And what we were working on during that time is number one was anticipating questions that could come up, but then taking the ideas from Paul's books. And it's what we call creating your greatest hits. And so it's the stories and the systems that you share that are going to make a difference in people's lives. And then it's not about memorizing or scripting anything, because to me, if I had to script it, I probably would never be able to do it. But instead, it's really getting a flow down. It's really making sure that these main ideas that need to be shared, they're going to motivate people to action, that you go through them enough that you can't get them wrong. This is my background, Ludia. Before I was working with financial professionals to tell their stories, I was in theater. I was a theater director. And
Wow.
so my whole purpose was to connect with audiences and to rehearse. And I saw the power of rehearsal. And so I'm just applying it now when I'm working with people getting ready for podcasts. And so that's what we did every single day. We rehearsed until he couldn't get it wrong. And he felt such strength building every day. One of the things that I think is important when you're preparing is to have your origin story down pat. And that was the first question I'd ask him. And funnily enough, it was the one that he struggled with the most, that he would say, I'd say, okay, tell me about your background. And he'd say, background. And he had a difficult time speaking about himself. But I said, you've got to get this right, because if it's the first 60 to 90 seconds that you're going to be sharing, that's when I'm deciding, am I going to listen to this episode of the podcast or not? So we worked at it. We were thinking about how it's not about your resume. It's not about those designations and the credentials that you've earned, but really it's how do you connect with an audience? How do you share things about you that are meaningful? For instance, I have three daughters. So if somebody says that they have daughters in their intro, I'm listening. I want to hear what they have to say. And so we worked at that until he felt comfortable. And then that built momentum into what he was saying. And so for the first, I would say, week and a half, it was really just making sure we had those greatest hits, those things that he would share. And then the last few days leading up to it, it was more about getting to flow, where I could just ask questions and he could come back with the answers, where he felt very comfortable. And the great thing about that podcast was that he went on, it was supposed to be 1 hour, Lydia, and they went for an hour and 40 minutes talking about the subject. And afterwards, he called me and he said it was such a good experience. And that led to him doubling his business over the next year, because people heard it, that messaging that he shared really resonated with them, and they started to call him, wanting to have him help them to write their books that they could use in their practices.
Wow. I love that. Should we call it the unscripted podcast preparation?
Yes, unscripted, exactly. Which is
And
funny because as a theater person, I should like memorizing lines, but I don't. I would just rather have a direction that I can head in that's good.
and about the background question, I believe most people, or even me, I struggle with that one. When someone asks, tell me about yourself or your background, there's so many things that come into your mind. So he is not the only one who has that problem explaining himself.
Right. And that's one of the benefits of working with a coach because I listen to it with fresh ears. I'm thinking these are the things you're saying that are really meaningful, that are going to stand out to people in a positive way and are going to tell them something about you. It's a moment where you get to be your authentic self and deliver just the story about you that's going to create that connection and build that trust as you begin to speak.
Wow, I love that. So Gabe, before you work with financial advisors, do you check which podcasts they are targeting? For me, I call that one the listener fit or listener match, which means when they don't check, they are going to be in the wrong room. So what's the biggest change that someone needs to make so that they can stop sounding like a robot and start connecting with people that they are speaking to?
Yeah, I love that question because we don't want to come across as robotic in the things that we're saying. For most financial professionals, that's not the way that they speak when they're talking to clients, when they're talking to their team. It's not robotic like. And so it's really about when you have these opportunities to speak on podcasts, and a lot of times the people that I'm working with, they've written down their message, their stories in a book, and they're using that in their practice. And we call that the polished version of their voice, that it really encapsulates the way they would want to say it on their best day. But when these opportunities come up on a podcast, sometimes it's difficult to take that polished version of your voice from the written word and then to get it into the spoken word because you have this time where you're going to share it. To me, what you want to do is you want to use that time, you want to connect with your audience, you want to build trust, and then it's stories that you tell that motivate people to action. Because if I'm listening to a podcast, typically I'm either at the gym or I'm doing the dishes or I'm driving in my car. And I need something that stops me dead in my tracks, that makes me want to tune in and listen. And so that's the messaging that we try to create together, working with a coach. And so when they show up, they're going to really maximize the effectiveness of the things that they say. And Ludia, can I tell you a story about one of the people that I was working with early on?
Yes.
Her name was Morgan, or is Morgan, and she's only 35 years old, and she was building an extremely successful practice. And she'd written a book with a co-author. But when she came to me to work to go onto a podcast, she said, my co-author is the one with the stories. She said, I'm the numbers person. She said, I don't like public speaking. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I like to nerd out on numbers. This isn't really for me. And I said to her, I said, well, let's just start and we'll see what happens. And so my approach when I'm working with people is it's conversational. It's like, let's have a talk. Tell me some stories. And through those stories she was sharing, what I found was that she really had this deep compassion and this way of expressing ideas in the stories she was telling that showed how much she cared. And she said that when people came to her practice, that she and her team like to wrap their arms around their client's entire financial situation. And that when they would leave, they would give them hugs. And she was painting this picture for me that I really could feel how much they cared. And so I thought she really did have something to build on. And so she started podcasting and sharing that message and working with me so she could sharpen it continually. But she was having a lot of successes. And meanwhile, her business is growing during that same amount of time. And within 6 months, she also went on to the Kitsis podcast, which that was completely different from where she started, where she said, this isn't even what I like to do. And it raised her visibility and it positioned her as the expert in a way that nothing else could have, that podcasting journey that she was on. And she said too through that it helped inform the way that she now spoke to her team and that she spoke to clients. And so when you take the time to invest in moving from that robotic sound to really finding the way to tell stories, whatever works for you, the way that you have to take your best qualities, find what those are. That's where work with a coach is so helpful. And then be able to deliver it when you go onto a podcast. That's where you can have just incredible results from experiencing that.
Wow, good job. You did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, it was so fun to just be a part of that and to see the amazing transformation that took place as she went from author to now speaker on podcast and started embracing that and seeing how she could share that message broadly and make a difference in people's lives. And that was leading her ideal prospective clients back to her.
Wow. While we are on that, the first thing I look for in my free revenue leak audit, I'll flag if you are pitching the wrong podcasts. So I'll talk about that later. So you
Yes.
mentioned podcast mode, where advisors become technical and lifeless. How does that kill conversions?
Yes. Podcast mode, that's something that I saw really early on when we'd meet on Zoom so I could help them get ready for a podcast. And Lydia, for the first few minutes, as we just chatted and got to know each other, I would see their personality shining through. We would tell some great stories, we'd joke around. And that lasted until I said, "Hey, let's get to work on the podcast." And I'd say, "Question number one." And then all of a sudden, I just noticed that something completely changed. All of a sudden the personality disappeared and they started getting a little lifeless, like you said, a little technical, maybe too much on the numbers side of things. And so it was the information, it was all of that education that they felt that they needed to get through to the listener. But to me, it was taking me out of it because I was no longer feeling that connection. I was a little lost in the things that were being said. And so I knew that we needed to be able to get out of that podcast mode and to let that personality really shine through. And this is something that I talk about that on podcasts, I call it edutainment, that it's the education side of things, but you also have the entertainment side of things. And I know that can, I come from a theater background, so that feels natural.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, they say, I'm not an entertainer. This isn't what I'm here to do. But what I explain is that that entertainment side doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be funny or tell
Dancing.
the most. Yeah, exactly. That it's really finding what is working for you. Just like Morgan's example, where she was compassionate, she could really do that. She said to me at one point, she said, when we were preparing for a podcast, she said, "You just want me to have fun, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, because if you're having fun, then I think your listeners are going to have fun listening to what you say too." And so, podcast mode, if I have 10 minutes to work with somebody and I'm trying to help them get away from that, what I'm doing is I'm trying to move from that technical side of things to get the personality back involved, to go to stories. And so I was just talking to a financial advisor friend. He's in Nashville, Tennessee. His name's Ira, and he was getting ready for a podcast. He said that he was going to share about retirement. It was all these graphs and charts. And I said, "How are you going to share these graphs and charts on a podcast that, it's not going to translate to the way people listen?" And so what I started asking him was questions because he was talking about cash flow for retirees. And I said, "Tell me a story about somebody that's come in that's had a need and how you help them." And so he started talking about this guy that he was just retired and he wanted to do home improvement projects. And he wanted to be able to go to Home Depot and Lowe's a little bit more, but he didn't have the money for it. So Ira helped him to solve that situation. And then I said, "Well, what did he say when this got solved?" And Ira said, he came back and he said, "I'm able to go get the materials I need at Home Depot. And I'm just having such a good time with my retirement now." And I said, "That's the thing that I don't do home improvement projects, but I thought for listeners, I can think of my family members that do." And so now it's put me in that man's shoes. And I'm thinking about, oh, that's Ira, he found the solution that helped this person. And now that it connects with me, it builds trust, and that story motivates me for action for the people that I love that would be in that situation too. And so that's how moving from podcast mode, you get to the point where you say, like, okay, now I'm telling stories that really are going to make a difference in people's lives.
Okay, that is the E in Malik framework, which is episode messaging. The
Messaging.
bridge from their expertise to the listener's problem is usually broken. So in my audits, I usually timestamp moment where the guest goes into podcast mode, as you mentioned, and suggest
Yes.
a better bridge. So what is your number one fix for that, especially when someone doesn't know how to move from that to the problem of the listener?
Yeah. How do you fix it? Now, are you talking about fixing it in a podcast or in the preparation leading up to it?
In the preparation. You are preparing them not to enter into
Yes.
that podcast mode.
Right. Exactly. I think that as we're working, that's where the value of a coach can really make a big difference because sometimes people get running with ideas and in their head, it really makes a lot of sense that I'm sharing everything that they're going to need, that comprehensive approach. I'm sharing all the details. But what I'm trying to turn their thoughts to is that those are things that you can either one, do behind the scenes, or two, that get them to your office and then explain it. But really, it's more about connecting. It's really about, I say in my book, it's about reaching a person's heart before you get to their head. Because if you don't capture their heart with the things that you're saying, then you're never going to get their head. They're never going to fully invest in the things that you're saying. And so that's where I'll say, let's stop and I want you to tell it to me again. And I want you to give me those details. I want you to think of the things that are really people, the things that people said, the things that you said back, because that conversation, that's what can help somebody to put themselves in the shoes of the person you're talking about. And I think that's what leads somebody that's going down that path of podcast mode and really getting to the point where they're talking about things that matter to people and that are going to resonate on a deep level when they hear you speak.
Wow, I love that. And I would like to ask you this question. When you prepare them for the podcast interview, do you usually tell them that after the interview, you need to send people to a specific place? Where do you tell them to send their listeners to?
Oh, to send the listeners to. That's good because I think that's such an important, it's a key point about you've done the podcast now, and now what are you going to do with it? Because it's leaving opportunity on the table if you don't think through those ideas. And so the podcast hosts, they're going to share it from whatever platforms they use in order to get that podcast out there. But now you have the opportunity too to take that podcast, share it on your social media, put it on LinkedIn, get it out there. But also, there's tremendous opportunities right now that we talk about a lot that you're trying to create domain authority, which is when people are searching for a professional, whatever services you're providing, that where are we turning to now? I mean, it used to be Google, and now increasingly it's going to ChatGPT or to Claude and asking, I'm looking for this. Now, how do you get your name to appear? And so the book is the foundation, and then podcasts is sharing the message more broadly, but then it's what you do with it. And so you can create content based on those things that you've done that help to bring your name to the forefront of those searches. Or Google, it's that AI search so people can find you. And so that's one. But then the other one, Lydia, that I find so important is to take that podcast and use it with prospective clients before you have initial meetings. That my brother Paul and I have both found that when you have a meeting, if you send them the podcast of you talking about your best ideas and stories, that if they listen to it and then come into that meeting, they come in what we call pre-sold because they've already heard what you can do. They feel that trust. They have felt that connection. And so now it's not a cold meeting. Instead, it's they have better questions. And a lot of times what we found is that they're ready to go to work, that they say, I heard myself in what you were saying on that podcast, and I know you're the person to help me. And so let's get to it. And that's what really happens. That idea of pre-sold, that's a way that you can utilize the work and the effort that you put into podcasts in a very meaningful way.
Well, thank you so much for that elaboration. So usually there is a leak when it comes to after the interview has aired or someone has nailed the interview. The leak for me, it's the arrive for destination. I see so many podcast guests sending people to a generic homepage where they have so many tabs. They have their about page, contact me, and all that. And
Yes.
sometimes many people say find me on LinkedIn or check out my website. So I usually check your URL and landing page. If it's broken, I tell you how to fix it, because you need to send people to a specific place.
Yes.
If it's your website, it doesn't need to have about or contact. It's only one page, a specific place. So for you to convert them the way you want, if you have a free resource like a checklist, a case study, or anything, it needs to be that specific page, no distraction.
Yes. That I agree with you completely that it's difficult for people to connect the dots sometimes when you're sending them different places. It has to be clear as possible. And that's what we usually set it up with a book website. And so when you arrive at that page, because Lydia, if I go to somebody's page and it's, so many different things coming at me, I'll just leave. I can't, I'm not going to spend too much time searching. It's too much effort. And I really can't invest the time a lot of times. But so that's where when we do websites, we build them very clean that you open up the page. It's usually a copy of your book or a picture of your book, picture of you, and then a link to get a free copy of the book and calendar link. And then if it's media that you've done, the podcasts, there's a clear tab that goes straight to it so you can hear that. And then we put the author interview, which is the first podcast a lot of times the author does with us. And we put that right there front and center because before investing in reading in a book, before investing in an initial meeting, you can listen at 2 times speed, hear the author talk about their best ideas and share their stories, and then get a sense of if that's right. And then you move on to the book and to meetings and to going to the practice. But you're 100% right. Clarity is key because you want it to make it as easy and as user friendly for the people that you're directing and having one place, not sharing 6 different things that people can't connect to anyway. But that's where I say it's right to one page and it's an effective tool for you.
Wow, this has been incredibly valuable. I have enjoyed every moment of it. You've basically walked us through the 4 leaks that kill podcast ROI. Here's what I want to offer the listeners. I call this my podcast guest revenue leak audit. It's a 20-minute session where I take one of your recent podcast appearances or your guest pitch and I run it through my leak framework. So what you get is a Loom video with timestamps of your specific leaks, a written report with fixes. There is no sales pitch here. I only do 3 of these per week. If you want one, go to the show notes and click free audit. So do you think your audience could benefit from something like this?
I think so. I think that, the work that you put into this, it's an investment in attracting ideal clients. And so that's where, I think we have a lot of the same thoughts on this, Lydia, about how somebody should prepare and how they should be thinking about the opportunity that comes up with podcasting because it's tremendous right now. There's a lot of hosts that are looking for quality guests that can share educational ideas. And when you're out there sharing your messages more broadly, you're reaching a wide group of people that can ultimately lead back to your practice and help you grow.
Okay, before I let you go, is there something that you'd like my audience to know that we didn't mention? Maybe you're promoting a book, you're promoting a service or something. So your turn.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. And I'm going to send you to my website if you'd like to get more information. And you can look and see for yourself if I've made it clear and I've connected the dots. Hopefully I have. It's influentialadvisor.com/Gabe, Gabe, influentialadvisor.com/Gabe. And there you can get a free copy of my book, Sharpen Your Message, which is about guest podcasting. And it has my calendar link because if you'd like to work with me, I'd help you sharpen your message and would love to do that.
Thank you again, Gabe. Everyone, please find his book and the podcast in the show notes. So that free audit link again, it's in the show notes. If you are a coach or consultant who has been in 5 or 10 podcasts and you're not sure why you're not getting clients from them, let me look under the hood. I'll find your link. So go to spyrifia.com/guest audit or click the link in the description to go there. So my name is Lydia. Thank you so much for joining us in the Freelancers Mike episode today. See you next week.
get it wrong. If you ever wanna get